How you guys? How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to the final video in the series where we talk about adding JavaScript and jQuery in particular we're going to be using. And this is what we're going to be doing in this video, where if I refresh the page, you can see that everything fades in and moves to place. And then when I scroll down, each section will fade in once I hit a certain point. As I'm scrolling, you see the numbers kind of scrolling up to their given number. The contact form fades in, and that's what we'll be doing in this video. So if you've made it this far, you've watched the first two videos in the series, this is the final video. If you haven't watched the first two videos, I suggest you watch the first two, because we come up with this whole design. The first video is HTML and CSS. The second video is the media queries, which gives us the responsiveness. So as you scroll down in size, you can see that everything moves according to the actual device we're on. On an iPhone, you can see it looks good. On a tablet, it also looks good. And that is what we'll be doing in this video. So without further ado, let's get into the code. And again, thank you guys for watching. Alright guys, welcome back to the third video in this series, where we will be adding some JavaScript, jQuery in particular, to add some animations and fade in effects to our web page. So if I refresh the page, you can see that everything kind of fades in on the page load when it loads. And then if I scroll down, again, the projects fade in and the header kind of comes in from the top. Same with the team section, and these numbers scroll up to their the actual number they should be. They start at 0. Contact form fades in, and that's what we'll be doing in this video. For the most part, it's pretty simple. The only part that gets really kind of confusing is the number section, which we'll talk about later. But again, just like the CSS and HTML was laid out, a lot of this is kind of repetition. Once we do this first section, we're going to do the same thing to every section. So by the end of it, you should have a pretty solid grasp on using jQuery and the animate method that comes with it. And one more thing is that there are a million ways to do this. And I'm not saying that the way I did it is like the correct way, or if there even is a correct way. But this is how I went about doing it for this video, and it works just fine. So yeah, other than that, I guess let's get into the code. If I go to the code, I've deleted all the code here, so we can just get started. I deleted all the script file and everything that I had. So the first thing you're gonna want to do is get rid of this. You won't have that yet. If you don't have your script file, you can make one. Just in the same directory as your HTML and CSS, just make a file called script.js and link that at the bottom of your body, the end of your body tag, right above the closing body tag in your HTML. Just script source, and then you name the file right there. And then we're gonna grab the jQuery file, which I'll show you how to get. If let's see, do I have it open? I do. If you go to just Google jQuery, it's jQuery.com, it'll take you to this page right here. You're going to want to click the download jQuery, and we're going to use the download the compressed production version. So if you just right click this and copy the link address, we're not going to actually download the file, we're going to use the CDN version. So you right click, copy link address, and if you go into the code, add another script file and paste that link right there. That'll give you access to jQuery and all of the functions that come with it. And make sure you put this script file above your script file, because everything we write in our file needs this file to be able to access it. Our file needs to use what we're getting from this file. So this file needs to be read first, and then our file comes after that. So once you have both these script files linked at the bottom of your HTML file, we're good to start writing some jQuery. So one thing I will mention, we're gonna have to go back into our CSS a little bit later and add some properties, because we're gonna be animating properties using jQuery. which we haven't actually set in our CSS. That'll make sense once we get into it a little bit later. But let's just start coding. The first thing I'm gonna do is add the document ready tag that comes with jQuery. And this is how jQuery works. You use a $, parentheses, and then normally you just add quotes and you target a class or an ID, you know, whatever you're looking to select in the HTML and CSS. And that's how you pretty much target elements. So it'll make sense a lot more once we get into it. I don't know why we have two of the same files, but for the document ready, you don't use quotes though. It's just $, parentheses, and you type document, and then outside of the parentheses you type .ready, and then ready has parentheses as well, and then in these parentheses we're gonna write a function. So this is how you write a function parentheses, and then the curly brackets, and then open that up, and here is our document ready function. I'm actually gonna rewrite well, I'll leave it the way it is. You could use ES6, which is the new version of JavaScript, and using an arrow function, which I actually like better. So if I were to do that, I'm just Control-Z here, it would look like this. You just eliminate the word function and you add the parentheses, and then you add an arrow and then the curly brackets. It's called an arrow function. It's an ES6 feature. And actually, that's what I'll be using in this. So we'll start with that. What this line right here is saying is once the document, that's what we're targeting, is the actual document. Once the document loads, once the document is ready, do all of this stuff in here. So all this code won't be ran until our page actually loads all the way, which is what we want. We want the JavaScript to load last, so that way our website loads as fast as possible without trying to load a bunch of JavaScript code before it needs to. So with that being said, let's get started. The first thing we want to do is, if I go to my page, this is the wrong page. This is the final product. Let me get out of here. Okay, this page. And I refresh the page, nothing happens. We want this logo to kind of fade in from the top. So the way we're going to do that is first we're going to target this logo. So the way to do that is I'm going to add some comments, banner section. And the way we do that is $, parentheses, double quote or single quote, but I'm going to use double. And then .logo, just like CSS. And then outside of the parentheses, you're going to do .animate. And then in these parentheses, it takes a few options. The first one is the things you want to animate, which we're going to pass in as an object. So that's curly brackets. And then next to that, we're going to add a comma. And this is the amount of time you want it to take to animate, which we're going to use 1,000 milliseconds for the most part for all of these, which is 1 second. You could change that to whatever you want. There's a lot of different options for that. I recommend you do Google Animate in jQuery just to find out a lot more about it, because we're only using these two properties, and there are actually a few more you can add over here, like easing and step, I believe, is another one. But yeah, we're gonna keep it simple for the majority of this section. Once we get to the numbers section, we will elaborate on this a little bit, but for right now, this is what we're looking for. You can add a semicolon at the end, and we're gonna go in this curly bracket and open it up, just like we did with the document ready. And in here, we want to specify what we're looking to animate. So I'm gonna animate the top, which you put in double quotes, and outside the quotes colon, and then double quotes again, 0 pixels. And this will make sense in a second. For now, just type it, follow with me, and then add a comma after that. And we're gonna also animate the opacity to 1, which is 100%. So we're animating the top to be 0 pixels and the opacity to be 1. Make sure you have the colon outside of the double quotes. And that is our first section. So if I save the page and refresh, you'll see that nothing happens. The reason for that is because the opacity is already 100 and the top is already 0. If you're not familiar with positioning using top, left, right, bottom properties, I definitely recommend doing more research on relative and absolute positioning, which I'm not going to cover too much in this video either, but we will talk about it a little bit. If I go to the CSS and I navigate to the logo right here, banner logo, there are properties called top, right, left, bottom, and that just basically moves the element, the div or whatever it is, based off what you specify. So in order to use those properties, you have to set the position to be relative. And what relative is it means that, let's see if I highlight over if it tells me anything. It does not. But basically relative and absolute are the main two, and fixed is another one. There's a few more, but relative positioning just basically keeps the element where it is in the document, but allows you to use these top, right, left, bottom properties. So notice if I get rid of this and I just set top to be 1000 pixels and refresh. Let me also comment out. You don't have to follow along. Let me comment out this JavaScript. If I refresh, nothing happens, right? But if I set the position to be relative and then I have the top, you'll notice it moved 1000 pixels from the top down. So yeah, that's basically what top does. I do 100, you'll see it moves a little bit. So that's how we're gonna move all these elements, and then we're gonna animate them over 1 second back to their default position. So in the CSS, we're gonna set them where we want them before they fade in, and then we'll have them fade to their default position using jQuery. So I'm gonna keep the position relative, and I'm gonna set the top to -50 pixels. So I moved it up, -50. And then I'm also gonna set the opacity to 0, which will then hide it, obviously. And then using the jQuery, if I comment these back in, top 0 and the opacity 1, we're basically animating over 1 second the opposite of what we set here. So it'll set the top back to 0, which is normal, and then the opacity back to 100%, which is normal. So now if I refresh the page, you can see that our box moves down and fades in. That's exactly what we're looking for. And that's basically what we're going to do for the rest of the entire document. It gets a little more tricky once we want them to fade on scroll, which we'll talk about. But for this banner and this section, we just want it to happen right away once the document loads. So we'll have it right in this section right here. So next up, we want to do this text. We want it to come from the bottom up. So again, we're going to, if we look at our HTML, we want to target this div, which has the H1 and the paragraph in it. And the easiest way to target it is just giving it a class. I'm just going to give it a class of, I guess, text will work fine. And again, we will $ parentheses, double quote, period, text, dot animate, parentheses, curly brackets, outside the curly brackets, comma, 1000 milliseconds. So pause, replay that if I went a little fast, and we're actually going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to copy and paste, but instead of top, I'm going to use bottom. You could use top, but bottom just makes more sense because we want it to come from the bottom. And in the text div, in the H1 and paragraph, so if we go to the CSS, I could just put it in both of these, H1 and paragraph, but I can actually, now that I gave a class to that div, I can target that div. And we will, we'll set, first, remember, position has to be relative. We're going to set the bottom to be -50 pixels. And the opacity to 0. But first, before I set that, I'll show you what it does. Let me comment these out. You notice our text is 50 pixels down. So that's what -50 does. Just so you can visualize. Bottom, it's moving bottom up 50 pixels. It's kind of weird, but you can always use the dev tools. Just mess around with these numbers until you find something you like. That looks good for me. I'll set the opacity as well to 0. And then if I uncomment these out, basically setting them back to the default, there we have it. Our banner is looking nice. And that's it for the banner section. Let's move on to the what we do section. I'm gonna go ahead and leave a comment in here, what we do, just to keep things organized. And the first thing we want to do is target this H1. We want the same thing to happen. We're gonna move it up 50 and animate it down back to the default position. So to do that, we do the same thing. I'm gonna target the service section H1, just like I would in CSS. So $ parentheses, double quote, period for class, service section H1. And just like CSS, animate 1000 milliseconds, and we're literally going to copy the top and opacity that we wrote previous, because that's what we want to do. And then we have to change the CSS that we have set for default up 50, just like we did before. So first, remember, position has to be relative. We're gonna set the top to -50 pixels and the opacity to 0. And if we refresh the page, there we have it. Fades in. It looks good. Now let's do the same thing for these sections. So this is cool because these are all in one div, this whole element here. If we look at the HTML, it's the service div, which holds the image, the H2, the paragraph, and the button. So we can target the service div and do this same thing, and it'll do exactly what we're looking for. So $ parentheses, double quote, service dot animate 1000 milliseconds, and then I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna copy the bottom the text, the same thing we did earlier. And then again in the CSS, I have to change the service to -50 bottom, like we did at the text. So position relative, bottom -50 pixels, and opacity to be 0. So now if I refresh the page, there you have it. What we do section is complete. It looks good. All right, so for the recent project section, it's very similar, but it's a little bit different in the sense that we want it to only occur when we scroll past a certain point. So once we scroll to like here, we want these to fade in and fade in. So the way to do that is we want to keep in this document ready function. We want all this code to only occur once the document's ready. So I'm going to open this up a lot. And then I'm going to add some comments saying, let's say, just scroll, animate, I don't know, that'll work. And then what this looks like is similar to what we did with the document ready, but there's something else called scroll. So $ parentheses document. So on the whole document, when we scroll, we want to do something. So again, just like we did with the ready, we're going to add an arrow function in here. Parentheses, arrow, curly brackets, open it up. And then I'm going to comment at the end of this. So we have the start of the scroll animate, and I'm going to say end scroll animate. So we know where that ends. And then under here, I'm actually going to say end jQuery. So we know that that's the end of the actual code, the whole code. This is the end of the scroll section, because we're going to have a nice amount of these in here as well. So to show you what I'm kind of talking about, if I say a console log here, console log, which just shows a message to the console, and I type in window.scroll y, and I believe you can actually do document.scroll y. Let's see. Nope, you can't. Just disregard that. We'll keep it a window scroll y. And you'll see every time I scroll, we're getting a number on the right side over there. So we're going to use that number to tell these elements when to fade in. So basically, if this number hits a certain point, run this code to fade in these elements. And that's how the rest of this works. It's an event listener that happens every time we scroll. So I'm going to keep this console log here just for development purposes. We can get rid of it at the end, but that helps us see what number we're trying to use. So for example, once I get right about here, so let's say 600, I want this to fade in, and I want these to fade in as well. So the way you do that is in the scroll function. So every time we scroll, that's where the window scroll y lies. We're gonna have an if statement. So if the window scroll y is greater than 600, do some code. If I put this outside of this, I put it just down here, it may actually work. We'll try it. We're gonna keep it in the scroll function first. So if we scroll past 600, we want this to fade in, the recent projects. So let's go to our HTML and see what we have here. Recent projects H1 is what we're looking to target. So in the if statement, we'll say if the scroll is past 600, grab the recent projects H1 and animate it over 1 second. And we're literally gonna do the same thing. We're gonna animate the top back to default and the opacity to 100%. And you guessed it, in the CSS, we have to actually move it up and change the opacity. So the recent projects H1, remember position relative, top, -50 to move it up and make it invisible. And if you notice, it's gone. And if I refresh the page, we don't see it still. But if I scroll to, I'm at 600, I'm not greater than 600. Let's actually, well, if I scroll down again, it pops up. But I want it to be at 600. So I'm going to say if it's greater than or equal to 600. So that way, it just happens at 600 and not after that. So there you go. That works great. I want to try something. If I move this outside of the scroll, I want to see what happens. I want to see if it still works. I believe it should. It does not. The reason it doesn't is because this number, this scroll has this property, the scroll y. So this number doesn't know, like, if we're not in this scroll function, this is not even a thing. It doesn't know, like, well, we don't know what number it is. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. There's no number because you don't have an event listener on the scroll telling us what number you're on. So, okay, just making sure. I probably will get, yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of how the rest of this process works. So again, we want these to fade in as well at 600. And we could have them fade up. I just want them to fade in, honestly. So in this if statement, I'm going to open this up. If you click, you can see what curly bracket belongs to which curly bracket. So the if statement here, I want to add another one of these. I want to target each individual project. Matter of fact, I can do the projects div. Yeah, the whole section. We'll just do that. So let's grab that $ parentheses double quote dot projects, animate parentheses over 1 second, and we're just gonna do opacity to 1, and then in the projects CSS we have to just set the opacity to 0. So if we refresh, there you go. Recent projects done. Again, I'll start at the top of the page. As we scroll down, there we go. it pops up. Same thing with the next section. I like 1100. I want this to fade in and these to fade up. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe 12. We'll do 11. Just so, yeah, we'll do 11. So it's not fully in view when it fades in. I like that. So in this scroll function, but outside of this if statement, we're going to add another if statement saying if the window.scroll y is greater than or equal to 1100, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to target the team. Let's go to the HTML and see what that's called. That's team section H1. So we'll start off doing that. $, parentheses, double quote, team section H1, animate, add an object in there, over 1,000 milliseconds. And we're going to do the same thing we did before, the top and the opacity back to normal. And then in the CSS, team section H1 right here, we'll set the position relative, top, -50 pixels, and opacity 0. Nothing happens. There it shows up. And then if we start at the top of the page, you'll see that that section still works. And as soon as we hit 1100, that fades in as well. So inside this if statement, we'll have the next one, which we want to do the team div, which holds all these team members. So same thing, team, animate, animate, and then we'll copy this. And you know, I'll just type it. Bottom, we want it coming from the bottom, 0, and opacity, quotes, 1 for 100%. And then in the team CSS, we have to position relative. We'll do bottom -50 pixels and opacity to be 0. There we go. That section is complete. I'll do half of the numbers section. We'll come back to the actual numbers later because it's a little more difficult, and I'm still honestly trying to understand fully how it works. But we'll do this part first, and then the contact, and then we'll come back to these numbers, having them like auto scroll up to the number. So just like we did before, let's look at the number over here and find a number that looks good to have them fade in at. So those sections look great. I'm thinking about 1500. We'll have this part happen. So inside the scroll again, but outside of this if statement, so right here, we will say if the window.scroll y is greater than or equal to 1500, we'll do some more stuff. And what do we want to do? We want to grab the numbers section H1 and P. So here's what I'm going to do in the HTML. Just to keep this simple, I'm going to wrap these two in a div, and I'll give that a class. So let's say numbers text, I guess. Yeah, that'll work. And then I'm going to cut these out and put them inside that div, just so I can target this div and move both of these up at the same time instead of having to have two separate selectors for them. So we'll go numbers text, animate, and we're gonna do the same thing. Top 0, opacity 1, and then we'll target this numbers text in CSS, which we haven't actually done yet. We've targeted each individual H1 and paragraph, but so right above that, we'll just target the numbers text. I think that's how I wrote it, right? Yeah. Position relative, top, -50 pixels, and opacity 0. So if I Refresh the page. It didn't work. What did I do wrong? Let's see. Numbers text. That doesn't look right. Numbers text. Let's go back to. I didn't save the HTML file, so it didn't recognize the div. There we go. If the page will reload for me, there it goes. For some reason the text isn't centered anymore. Something with adding the div kind of threw it off. So in the numbers text right here, I'll also add text align center. There we go. All right, that looks good to me. And we'll, like I said, we'll come back to these numbers and we'll do the context section next. So the context section, I'm looking over here. What, 1900? We'll have it fade in and this text fade down. That looks good to me. So outside this if statement, we'll add another if statement. If the Windows scroll Y is greater than or equal to 1900, then we'll do this section. So one thing I was just thinking, like each if statement, we could have like an else if, but it wouldn't work in this section or in this situation. So we just have multiple if statements. But if you kind of read it like from the top down, we're saying like if the page is greater than 600, do these, which it does, and these don't run because it's not greater than 1100. But the reason these don't run again is because they are already finished, I guess. Like they've already set back to what they are. So it's not like the CSS gets reset every time we scroll. So that's why all these if statements just work. Like each if statement for each. It's almost like media queries in a sense. But yeah, anyway, so let's get back to let's get back to it. We want to do the context section. If I go to the HTML, scroll down, we want the context section div. We want this part. So I'm just gonna give a class to this div. I'm gonna call it I don't know, top text. I guess that's not really a good name, but that's what I called it. Animate. Boom. And we're gonna just do top opacity again. And I'm trying to kind of space this out so it's easier to read, but I don't know if it really helps or not. But we'll go in the CSS to the context section. Here's the H1 and P separately. Above that though, we have context section. Honestly, we just call it top text. I can just do this. And we want the position relative, top, -50 pixels, and opacity 0. So refresh, you can see that works great. Looks good. And I guess let's see how it looks we hit 1900. There we go. It's working perfectly. And now we just have to do the form. We'll do that from the bottom up. The way we'll do the form, if we look at the HTML, is just a form. So yeah, we'll just target the form. The reason we added a class to this div and not this form is because there's only one form and there was actually multiple divs. So if we just targeted context section div, it would have animated both of these divs, which I didn't really want in this case. But there's only one form, so in that case we can just target the context section form. We'll animate that just like before. And notice I'm typing it out every time. I could just copy and paste a lot of this, but I really like when you're learning to type everything out, because just learning how to type it and typing it over and over again really gets you used to typing it and you learn faster, at least in my opinion. That's why I really don't like using shortcuts with VS Code and stuff like that until you really know what you're doing. And that's why, like, when I first started, I would type everything out. Even like watching tutorials, I would type everything out. Even if they would copy and paste, I would just type it out just to get used to typing it. But I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm going to copy the bottom and opacity 1. And in the context section form CSS, I will set right here, context section form, I will set the position relative, bottom, -50 pixels, and opacity 0. And there we go. That looks good. So the start of our page, if I refresh, Everything looks good. As I scroll down, things fade in. It's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty good. And yeah, the only thing we have left is these numbers here. And the way I'm going to do that is that'll be in this media query, the numbers section. And I'll do it underneath the text here. It'll go in this if statement, and it'll go right about here. So the way I'm going to do this, first I'm going to go to the HTML. I'm going to go to that section, which is right here, and I'm going to give a class to all these H1s. So a good way to do this is if you just hold, what is it, Control, Alt. You can select multiple lines, and I'm going to give it a class of count. And then I'm going to add something else here that may not look familiar to you, but it's a property that allows JavaScript to use, if that makes sense. So I'll just type it and show you later. Data value equals, and then I'll add the quotes. So when you add data or data hyphen, you can target this in JavaScript using you can just, it allows you to target, it's basically like having classes, IDs. You can make your own properties just by adding data hyphen and whatever you want. So we're gonna set this to be the actual number that we want. Like we have the number here, but we're gonna actually set these to 0 anyway. We want it to start at 0, and here is gonna be where the number we want to count up to. And you don't have to do it this way, but I feel like it's better practice to do it this way. And getting used to using properties like this are just important, just something else to learn. Yeah, I recommend doing more research on like data properties. I'm not even sure if I'm like describing them correctly, but it's just basically another way to target things in JavaScript, just like you can with, you know, classes and IDs and CSS and things like that. So yeah, anyways, so we have that. We'll go back to our JavaScript, right underneath the numbers text, and the first thing we're gonna do is target all the H1s. So just like we did before, we'll target the count, and we're gonna say for each one, because we're targeting multiple. So we're saying do this for each one of them. Each is a jQuery property. There's also a similar version of it in vanilla JavaScript, but I'm not gonna go into that. And just like everything else, it takes parentheses, and then it takes a function. So I'm gonna do an ES6 function again, the arrow. There you go. And this is gonna be confusing if you've never heard of this before. This keyword in JavaScript, I do your own research, do a lot of research on it. It's super confusing in certain situations because it can be used in different ways depending on how you're using it and what you're using it for. But in this case, if we go $, this with no quotes, what this does is basically saying for each, so we're grabbing each one of these count for each one, do something for this one, like each in particular one. So this code is going to run on whatever one it's on. So if we're talking about this first H1, this is referring to the first H1. And yeah, it's super confusing, but if you, the more you use it, the more you'll understand it. But we're just targeting the individual H1 we're talking about, because again, we're grabbing 4 different H1s here. So this is just saying, yeah, this one, the one we're doing right now, the one with the data value 7. We're gonna add a property prop, and it's gonna be counter, and the initial value outside of the quotes comma is 0. And this is what we want to animate. So I get that this is super confusing. It took me a long time. I still don't even like fully grasp. There's multiple ways to go about doing this. You don't have to do it this way. There's actually libraries out there that make this super easy. You don't have to know what any of this does, but I really feel like it helps to just see how it works and to type it out and just, you know, troubleshoot. If you're having troubles, just get it to work, mess with it, change some lines, just mess around, get used to just editing code and trying to troubleshoot things for yourself. It really helps. And this is what we're going to animate. So prop, we have the parentheses, counter, comma 0, this is where the initial value is. And this is what we're going to dot animate. So again, animate's similar. It takes the curly brackets, and instead of just putting comma 1000 like we've been doing, I'm actually just going to open up the curly brackets here, because we're not, how can I explain this? So instead of just doing comma 1000 like we were doing, I'm going to do comma another object, and then we'll get into that in a little bit. Well, let's open this first one up like we've been doing. So that's nothing new. Normally we would have 1000 here, but now we have another object, another curly bracket. And right here though, we're gonna say counter, right? This outside of the parentheses, data, and then we're gonna say value. So that this right here, the data value, is actually grabbing this data value. Data is just referring to this property. It's saying, okay, you have a property in HTML that you're using. What's the name of it? Or you have like a custom property you made in HTML. What's the name of it? And then we're targeting, it's the value that we made. We could have named this, you know, Jimmy if we wanted to. It doesn't matter. Then right here you just say, okay, you have a custom data value property. What is it? It's called Jimmy. Okay, cool. But, you know, we use value because it makes sense. Oh, what am I doing? Let me change this from Jimmy back to value. And that's it for that line. What this is saying, okay, the counter starts at 0. We want to animate it to be whatever the value is of this count, this H1. So it's going to run through all 4 of them and do this, because we set each here. Count for each one, set a property of counter to, starting at 0, and animate that to be whatever the value is right here. So I know that's confusing. Bear with me. It's going to get a little more confusing right here, but we're almost done. So in this curly bracket, where we normally have the time, we are going to have the time, but we're also going to have a step function. So it's going to happen every time the number increments. Every second that it's animating, we're going to have a function run. So start off, we'll have the time, duration, 1000 milliseconds like we had before. And I'm not positive that you need the duration here. Actually, I think you do, because it's in an object. So up here we didn't need to put duration, but that's basically what it is. Duration 1000 milliseconds, duration 1000 milliseconds, just like we were doing before. And comma, we're gonna add another property here, and this is where it gets a little confusing. It's a step, which if you research animate, this comes with animate, the property or the method. Yeah, do some research on animate jQuery. I recommend it. These were the 2 that we kept out before when we were doing the simple version, just adding the duration. But so step, we're gonna have a function here. Actually, I'm gonna use an arrow function like I've been doing the whole time. And this is actually gonna take a parameter in here. So if you're not used to the JavaScript at all, and you're really new to like parameters and yeah, again, I hate just to keep saying, but like do research on how functions work and parameters and arguments, and those work in JavaScript, but it takes in, especially in this case, it's super confusing. But we're gonna add a parameter of just now, which this could be anything. This could be X or you know, it could be whatever. Now, and then we're going to use that right here. So in this function, we're going to say this again. And we're going to say dot text. We're going to change the actual text of whatever this count h1 is. And we're going to set it to math.ceil, which what math.ceil does, it just takes the number and rounds it up to the nearest number. There's math ceil, there's math floor, which will round it down. There's a bunch of other math properties. Math is a property just in JavaScript, object that provides basic mathematic functionalities. Yeah, there's a lot you can do with this. We're going to be using ceil to round the number up to the nearest number, and then that takes a parentheses, and we're going to put that parameter now. Yeah. I know you're probably like, okay, what are you talking about, right? I understand. I honestly don't fully. It took me a long time to get this working. I had it running without parameters, but then every time I would run the page, or every time I would scroll, seeing as we still are in this scroll function with an event listener, every time I would scroll, it would re-change the numbers, and it was, so doing it this way fixed it. And that's kind of how coding works. You just mess around and you get it to work. So I apologize if you're totally lost by this number section, and if I totally butchered how to explain it. But at this point, yeah, if I refresh the page, it doesn't work, which is terrific. Let me refresh the page. Let me start up here, refresh the page. Everything fades in, fades in. Numbers don't work. So I'm actually glad, because what did I forget? Let's see. I think what it might be is it doesn't like ES6 functions. So I'm going to get rid of this arrow function here. I'm going to say just like that. Still doesn't like it. Maybe this arrow function as well. Yep, that's the problem. So it didn't like the arrow function. So even to make it more confusing, it didn't like the arrow function, the ES6 function. So I apologize even more for confusing you. But if you had followed me and you had an arrow function in here, just get rid of the arrow, add function, and you should be good to go. Same with the step. Get rid of the arrow, add the word function, and you should be good to go. So now if we view the page, as we scroll down, those fade in, the team fades in, the numbers scroll up, the context fades in, and that is the end of the video. So I hope you understood for the most part, you know, how we have this scroll event listener and each if statement. Once we get to a certain point, run some animates. I hope you understood the animate and how we set all the properties of CSS to be, you know, up a position and invisible, and then we animate them in back to the default position over a second. You could change this to 5 seconds if you want, 5,000, whatever. So I hope most of it is made sense to you guys, and I hope you learned something. Like I said, I'm new to making videos like this, so I'm sure I'm rambling and not making sense sometimes and going too fast sometimes, but I hope you were able to learn something out of this, and I hope this whole number section somehow made sense. And just for fun, I'm going to take out this parameter and show you what happens. What was the issue with me when I was, well, I'm getting a bunch of not of numbers. Yeah, because, okay, we're not going to do that. But, I do want to show that you can have this to be X, and it'll work as well. Could be anything, as long as these two match. But, yeah, do some research on functions and how they work if you're not familiar. But that's the end of this video. I'm not going to waste your time talking and, like, just blabbering on anymore. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna have videos consistently coming out on web development and HTML, CSS, JavaScript on this channel. So if you enjoyed this series where we made this whole project, yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought I did well, what I did terrible, what I didn't explain good, what I went too fast, or what I did do well. I really appreciate it, and I will use your feedback going forward in the next videos. But yeah, I'm done talking. Hope you guys have a great day, weekend, and until the next time, I will see you in the next video. Take it easy, guys.